Hi, my name is Ariel Mahler, and I am the writer and director of a new web series called Façades. I originally wrote Façades because I recognized that while there were a lot of stories that claimed to be about the LGBT community, in reality, most of those stories only focused on the LGBT, you know, lesbian, gay, bisexual characters. There weren't really very many stories that were dealing with the T piece, with gender identity, with what it means to be transgender or gender nonconforming. Thankfully, today, I think that that has started to shift a little bit. We have some really great shows out there, whether it's Brothers, which is about trans men, by trans men, Her Story, which just came out, which is about trans women and by trans women. Even a show like Orange is the New Black, where you have Laverne Cox, who's a trans actress, playing a trans character. I still think that there's a lack of representation of people who are non binary, people who are genderqueer, who don't really fit into either male or female, but feel that they're either somewhere in the middle or somewhere outside of the gender binary. So that's what excites me about Facades, is it's telling the story of Reese, who is a gender non-conforming, genderqueer person. You know, they are dealing with issues of how do I, stand out and fit in at the same time? How do I express myself? How do I communicate my identity to others in a way that I think not a lot of stories are dealing with? One thing I'm really interested in is to see how the character of Finn evolves, both with the way that I write it and also with the way that Russell, the actor, plays that character. Because in the very first episode, we see Finn getting into drag, and the identity that we sort of understand that he has is that he's a cisgender man who does drag. And I think that that's important because I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't understand the differences between drag and transgender identity. Whereas drag is very much about performance. But at the end of the day, most drag performers take that all off. It's not really who they are. Whereas trans identified people, that is who they are. It's not a performance, it's not an act, it's not a costume. That is their identity. So I definitely wanted to show the differences between those two communities by representing a drag queen and a trans person in this relationship. So I also wanted to include the piece about Continental's newest high fashion model, which is very clearly a spoof of another popular reality television show that most people are probably aware of. And the reason that I wanted to include this in this story in particular is that I feel like reality shows like that hold this very unrealistic standard of what it means to be feminine, what it means to be a beautiful woman, really above the heads of most of us in this world. Most people who identify as women or somewhere on the feminine spectrum actually don't have most of those qualities. So when you have a show like Continental's newest high fashion model, which says, Tiara Anderson literally says, in order to be on the show, you have to be at least 5 feet 10 inches tall, no more than 110 pounds, medium length hair. You have to be, female, and her definition of female is female assigned at birth. And so people who don't fit that very, very narrow idea of femininity are kind of cast aside. And so then when you have a character like Reese, who is a trans, gender nonconforming individual who definitely doesn't fit into that super narrow idea of femininity, um, people don't really understand what to make of that. People don't really understand how to categorize that person. And then you have Finn, or Fantasia Fabulous, who doesn't fit in with that mold, but really desperately wants to. So you see him putting on all of the super extravagant drag and squeezing into these really tight outfits and trying out for the show because he so desperately wants to fit into that mold of what it means to be femininity. And so the question is, can his relationship with Reese free him and allow him to break out of those traditional ideas of what it means to be a woman and allow him to just express himself truly for who he is? And then there's Allie, who does make it on to the show, but the whole time she's a little bit uncomfortable. She's trying to figure out how she fits into this modeling world. Because in a lot of ways, she actually doesn't hold the same ideals of femininity that all of the other girls on that show have. They're kind of capitalizing on her differences and raising her above and saying, look at how great we are because we're celebrating this woman who's a little bit different. So I think that Allie is going to have some pretty strong reactions to that too, because nobody really wants to be tokenized in that way. I think that a web series can be a really great vehicle to tell these kinds of stories. One, because of accessibility. The nice thing about a web series is that once it's online, virtually anyone who has access to the internet can view it, which makes it a more widely spreadable message. And it makes it so that people who are interested in these issues can view them without having to come to a theater, without having to come to New York. They can literally sit in the comfort of their own home and watch this web series, which I think is pretty powerful.